Hello, welcome to Jesuit Missions podcast. Today we are journeying with Luis Orlando Perez, a Mexican Jesuit priest living in London. Luis, welcome aboard and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I read a very interesting statement made by you in Spanish. You said, "My way of translating the gospel today is through the promotion and defense of human rights." You have done a vast work in the field of human rights in Latin America, and you are at this moment pursuing a postdoctoral degree at UCL on the topic too. So would you mind telling us a bit how you got started in human rights?
Yes, well, before joining the Society of Jesus, I studied law at Jesuit University in Mexico. And in that moment, I was very interested in corporate law. And actually, I was working for an international law firm. But I feel not happy with my life. I felt like I really need to change my lifestyle, and I started a process that begins with the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola experience. So in those spiritual exercises, I discovered that I want to offer my life to God in this particular way of life, which is to be a Jesuit. So I'm talking about 18 years ago. In that moment, I was 21 years old. And so I was searching for a way to put in practice my knowledge and all what I have. So in Mexico, I talked with some Jesuits, and they told me, well, we have a program of 1 year working in a place or in a mission of the Society of Jesus, mainly in human rights centers or social centers that they have in Mexico. So I say I would like to try. So they allow me to work during 1 year in a human rights center in the southern of Mexico. And it was my first time I was close to human rights. It was the first time I have a victim of violations of human rights in front of me. Specifically, I was helping migrants coming from Central America to Mexico, to cross all Mexico because they want to arrive to United States. Mm-hmm. And I was very impressed for all the suffer and all the pain they passed through, all this during their journey to United States, and in that moment I felt that God was telling me, this is what I want you to do. Help them, help to have a better life, help them to not suffer all this that they are having.
Mm-hmm. So human rights came to you.
Yes,
you were not looking for it, but it came to you.
Actually, I was very surprised when the Society of Jesus told me, well, we have a human rights center. And I told them, well, I really don't know anything about it, but I can try. So basically, I learned what a human rights lawyer is and what was the problems in that moment in Mexico facing. Especially, I was focused on in immigration, yes, asylum seekers, refugees, and all this that was happening in 2006. Now the situation is horrible, but in that moment, the phenomenon was starting, and we were documenting how many migrants cross borders every day and what is happening with them, what is the response of the government of Mexico in the face of the migrants.
And why do you say that the situation is worse now?
Well, because now, 17 years after of this story that I'm sharing with you, the situation has changed dramatically. It was dramatic in that moment, but now the levels of violence are as if we were in a war. Yeah. We have, just to say something, we have 100,000 people who is disappear. We don't know where they are.
Mm.
And thousands of people murdered. Just in 2020, more than 50,000 people was killed intentionally.
Yeah. We had this tragic event with 2 priests murdered in Mexico, and I know you knew them, so firstly, so sorry. And I read some of your articles saying this event mirrors what is happening all over the country. So how is the situation in Mexico now, the violence that you were explaining, how people live in that situation at this moment?
Well, it's mainly focused in the poor areas, in marginalized areas. It's where the organized crime is more is committing all these crimes. The problem is from a human rights perspective, because human rights is focused on how the government use the power they have. They have to use properly according to the international law. But sometimes it doesn't happen. Government sometimes work together with organized crime to commit a lot of these violations, either because it's a very weak state or because the state is almost nothing there. Just to exemplify something, where my brothers Jesuits were killed, you have only a few policemen, very weak institutions. So you cannot expect much from state institutions. So this is what is happening. The roots where organized crime is trafficking not only drugs, also humans, and it's where all this violence is happening. So when I am talking about Mexico, I'm talking about this Mexico that is not in the tourist places, that is not in the big important cities. I'm talking about the poor areas.
Where millions of people live.
Where millions of people live. We are 140 million in Mexico. And the huge and the most famous city, of course, is Mexico City, because within Mexico City and surrounded the city are 35 million people living there, but the other 110 is in other parts of, and especially I think the organized crime and is working in where indigenous communities are, because they have interest in the natural resources. So they make alliances with some corporations from private sector as well, who is working in these areas. And for example, mining companies, when they arrive to some places, very far places, they receive a threat by the organized crime. And the organized crime tell them, if you don't pay us, you cannot work here, and you could be killed. So they are forced to do these kind of deals. We can explain this from this perspective, but in the responsibility side, this is very wrong, because you cannot do these kind of alliances with organized crime. You have to complain with the government, to ask for help, and to see if you can invest or not in that area. If it's not secure, you have to leave. But they play the game because they earn a lot of money. So this is a very complex situation that it could be explained trying to identify which business are in the area, which politicians are involved in this business, and how the organized crime is working in those regions, because it's a work of different levels of implication.
Yeah, you were talking about several institutional problems, and I know one of the aims of Center Pro, where you worked, is to bring these things to the table, to make them public, and to urge governments and institutions to act and to make things different. Could you explain us a bit how was the work there, the work you developed, and they are still developing in Mexico at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was working in the Human Rights Center Miguel Agustin Pro. Miguel was a Jesuit who was killed by the Mexican government in the 30s. And because he was a victim of this wrongdoing of the government, we have his name in the Human Rights Center. So the this NGO that we call Centro Pro, it's focused mainly on gross human rights violations, which means torture, extrajudicial killings, and enforces disappearances. And we also focus our work on the protection of the land, the protection of land, defend the land territories where the indigenous people is working. So the methodology we use, we call defensa integral, which means we choose cases that we call emblematic, because these cases explain what is happening in these regions or what is happening in this particular human rights violation. For example, one of our cases that we are helping is the disappearances of the 43 students in Ayotzinapa. This case is very well known internationally, in part because we help the families to give a word of what's happening. We give press conferences. We visit universities. We are all the time trying to call the attention of the media. At the same time, we have a legal area where the lawyers are preparing the case, fill a complaint at domestic level, and if a domestic level doesn't work, we go to international courts. So it's a huge team working in one case just to make it understandable for the people. And we do lobby, we do mass media products to explain about these cases. And we work in these cases for probably 10 or 15 years because these cases are so important that if we win, this will create a huge precedent for other similar cases like this. That's how we do our work.
How with all of the tragedies and the despair, it might be hard to believe that things can actually change and that the work you are developing matters. So where do you find the motivation to keep going? Where are the seeds of hope despite all of the despair?
Well, in my experience, the contact with the victims of violations of human rights has been the source of energy and passion for this field work, because the victims, with all their dignity, they fight against all these powers, huge powers against them, and they are. One author calls the tools of the weak, and the people from below has developed strategies to change the reality. And I think we need to listen to them. We need to accompany them to see what they are doing, what they want. And when you work with them, there is the hope is very easy to achieve. It's not just that you want to win the case. The whole process is full of hope, because you met a lot of people who really wants to change. So you start like a chain of hope. The places where you visit, the places where you travel, all these forums and panels of discussion about these topics, you start meeting a lot of good people in the country. So I think the hope comes from this process. All the networks that can be created around the victims is very important. Working in networks is what could be changed, that could do a change from below in Mexico. So this is where I think why we focus our work in grassroots communities, in grassroots movements. We believe in social movements as well, because in our experience, they have all this love and all this mercy to change the reality in Mexico. They are not searching money, they are not searching power, they don't need recognition. What they really want to change is if they suffer something, they want that this violation do not happen again. So that's their struggle, and that's how we make their struggle our struggle.
Do you think things will change, Luis?
It's changing. Mexico is changing. Now in Mexico, we have 160 groups of mothers working together in different parts of the Republic. These mothers are searching for their children disappear, and they are doing a lot of mobilization. They are making awareness of what is happening in their own situations, and a lot of people is helping them. As I told you, the change is, you cannot measure it. You can feel it. You can have the experience, but to have access to this knowledge, you have to be with them, help them. And of course, international organizations who wants to help, they want to know where should we help, or what should we do. I think we have to focus on the movements, the grassroots movements in civil society organizations, because supporting them, you support all the source of hope that nourish the networks, that nourish the people who will not go to the top. They always are in at the bottom, and that's where they work. It's another way of thinking to change the things.
Thank you so much, Luis. It was great to know more about Mexico and about you and the work you've been developing in human rights. And thanks to you who just listened to our podcast, Journeying With. If you want to stay up to date, please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to support our work, please consider donating through our website, jesuitmissions.org.uk.